Hi, my name is John, and this is Radio Free Platypus. Well, let's get started by looking at transitions. That is, moving from one scene in a video or a piece of film to another in order to help and aid telling in our story. Now, we're going to use some things here right now that are kind of bland because it's easier to see exactly what I'm talking about. And then maybe we'll move into something that is an actual set of footage with real images to show you how well this works. The first thing is probably the simplest, and that is that you simply have two pieces of footage that are joined together where one ends and another immediately begins. And it gives you a look something like this. You see the transition. It's very simple, very straightforward, and there's not a lot of foo-for-all or what have you. Now, you've seen this, all of you have, even me, in things like news programs, action sequences, things where we're not necessarily trying to be particularly creative, though it can be used to be creative in things like those very self-same action sequences, simply by setting the next set of footage very close to the first transition, and then maybe another one that would start up very close to the second transition. And it'll look something like this. And by shortening the distance between those transitions, you'll end up getting transitions where we tend to see a lot of things happening or perceive it that way because our brains associate quick change with action. Pretty simple, right? Let's go to what's probably one of the most used of the transitions, the crossfade or a crossover. This is particularly good if you have a story that having your visuals go abruptly from one thing to another, well, it kind of would lift the viewer out of the story that you're trying to tell. So here's how you would do it. We're going to be using the two video channels that you see here, V1 and V2. Now, the first footage is what we're coming from. The second footage here is what we're going to. Now, we're going to take that footage we're going to, the D footage in this case, and we're going to lift it up until it's into the Video 2 channel, or V2. Now, in order to do this, we need to move it to the left. We're going to move it to the left about, 15 frames. How do you do that? Well, you start by moving your scrubber right to the middle between A and D, hitting down the Shift key and then the left arrow key, hitting it once, twice, 3 times. Each time you've done that while holding down the Shift key, it's moved 5 frames. So 5 times 3 is 15. And if you've already figured that out, yes, you went to grade school. Now, I'm going to go ahead and take and move now that D footage until it stops right here, right at the scrubber. If it doesn't, it means that you have this little horseshoe magnet here where it says stop in timeline turned off. So make sure it's turned on. Now that it's right here and our scrubber is here, what we're going to do is continue to highlight the D footage. Go down to opacity right here, click on the stopwatch, and you'll notice it's created a keyframe at that point in the timeline. Now, hitting the Shift key and hitting the right arrow key once, twice, 3 times, releasing the Shift key and going back with the left arrow key once, twice, we're going to go back up here to the effect controls and the opacity, and going to this little button right here where it says add or remove a keyframe, we click it, and guess what? We've added a keyframe at that point. Now, we're going to leave that at 100%, and using the arrow key to the left of where we added the keyframe here, we click on that. It will take us directly to the very first keyframe, and since it no longer needs to be 100%, we click on that, hit 0.0, enter, and then let's back that off a little bit and play it and see what happens. A nice smooth transition from A to D. Now, if you need this to be a longer or shorter thing, all you need to do is move that footage, the D footage, to the left or right, and once you've done that, adjust your keyframes accordingly to make them longer or shorter. Watch what happens. See? Simple, right? Now, I know what some of you are thinking. Oh, sure, John. That works great for A's and B's and so forth. But what about real footage? Say you're flying over and suddenly you're at the city that you were flying to. And that sudden jump is, well, it's a little jarring. Well, let's do what we did before. Highlight the second footage, take it up to the Video 2 channel. Move it over, say about, 10 or 12 or even 15 frames. At the start of where that particular footage is, go to opacity, put in your keyframe, go a little bit further to maybe even the end of where it was on the first footage, left arrow key once, twice to move it back that way, but you're still highlighting the second piece of footage. Go back to opacity, add a keyframe. That particular keyframe, you want to keep it 100%. Use this arrow key to go to the original keyframe. Put that at 0.0%, and let's see what happens as we fly, and then move in a fade to the city we were going to. Doesn't that feel as though you did travel, and that you knew at the end of that time that you were traveling to that place? Really, really easy. Really simple. But you say, John, I know a little bit about Premiere Pro. Isn't there a simpler way I might do it? Well, there is a yes, and there is a no. If you go to the Effects tab on the lower left-hand corner that's available to you in Premiere Pro, there's this handy little thing cleverly labeled Video Transitions. And if you click on that and twirl it down, you'll notice something called Dissolve. Twirl that down, and suddenly you see something called Cross Dissolve. Well, what do you do with that? Well, you can take that Cross Dissolve, left click on it, bring it over there between those two pieces of footage we had before, and watch what happens. It gives you the same kind of effect. Yes, that's fast. Yes, it's neat. But the reason I gave you the others first, knowing what is going on under the hood makes using something like this to speed up your editing that much better. And sometimes, maybe, just maybe, you want to do it the old-fashioned way because you feel like you have more control rather than dropping in something that's pre-made. That's Cross Dissolve. We'll look to the others in just a moment. Fade out and fade in. This is commonly something that we've all seen on television, in particular when they go as a fade or a dip to black and then goes to commercial. And then coming out of the commercial from black, it fades back into the action happening on screen. It's a great way of breaking up what's going on into its component parts because we want the narrative to go from point A to point B. It's really pretty simple if you think about it. If we take the black video, left click on it so that we can drag it over on top, all that's necessary at this point is to go ahead, highlight the black video, bring our scrubber so that it's directly between the two pieces of footage that we're trying to fade out of and then fade back into. We go back up to the effect controls. Once again, looking at opacity, we click on that stopwatch to get that keyframe right there in the center between the two. Taking the upper scrubber, let's move that back to the beginning. We'll go ahead and put another keyframe there. Go to the next keyframe again, which was the one we originally put in the center. And now let's take the upper scrubber and move it all the way to the end. Put another keyframe there. Now, what's going to happen, what animates this whole thing, is the motion from A to B, or from the start to the end. Now, currently, all of our keyframes are at 100%. What we want is now change that first keyframe from 100% to 0.0. And there we've done it. The center would stay at 100%. The end, once again, change that to 0.0. Whoops. Fumble fingers. Always watch out for them. So let's take a look and see how that looks. A fade out, and then a fade back in. And if we have some space in the middle where we put in, say, an announcement or a commercial or what have you, it would give us that wonderful look that we've come to know and love on things like network television. It's really not that hard to do, and if you think about it, in the lower left-hand corner, if we go to the effects, and once again, video transitions and dissolve, you'll see that there's something called dip to black. Once again, left click on that, drag it over, put it in between, and we have that same type of effect. Now, why would I want to do it the first way and not this way all the time? Well, remember, we might want to go ahead and put a commercial, an announcement, or something else in between those two pieces of footage. It's not as easy in my mind to do it using the dip to black, but you know it's there, and sometimes you can use that to save yourself time as well. Now, some of you that have sharp eyes may have noticed that in that lower left-hand corner under dissolve, there's also something called dip to white. Well, that's exactly the same thing as what I just showed you in dip to black. For aesthetic reasons, you may want to use a white transition as opposed to a black one. It's not often used, and it is an aesthetic choice. Now, you can do it simply by clicking on it, left-clicking on it, and then simply dragging it and putting it in the middle and noticing that it goes to white now and comes out of white. To do it the old-fashioned way is quite simple. All that's necessary is that you have gone through and made yourself a color mat that is the whitest possible white you want. Left click on that, drag it over like you would if it was black. Once again, setting things up between the two pieces of footage. highlight the white, go to opacity, and once again, you're going to go ahead and set up those different keyframes at the beginning and end of your transition that you're making. And of course, it's going to end at 0.0, and it's going to start at 0.0 as well. And once again, let's take a look at it as it goes through its transition to white and out of its transition from white. Once again, there is a very fast dip to white that is available to you natively here in Premiere Pro. But knowing to do it as we've shown you here gives you a little bit more control, I think. And it's always good to know what goes on under the hood.